Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today's battle rhythm, the upcoming administration and Congress, implications for veterans' future, will be hosted by Jeanette Gillis. Jeanette is the director of the network at America's Warrior Partnership. The network provides local veteran-serving organizations a connection to national resources when a veteran's request cannot be met locally. To find out more, please visit americaswarriorpartnership.org/the network. That's it for me. Jeanette, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of our affiliate communities, branches, veteran service organizations, and guests. We have a special battle rhythm today, and we're excited to have you all here. As we anticipate the new administration in Congress, it's critical to consider the potential impacts on our veterans. This is a pivotal moment to advocate for improved health care, enhanced educational benefits, and better support services for those who have served. By uniting our voices and pushing for meaningful change, we can ensure that our veterans receive the respect and resources that they deserve. We're very excited today to have Lorraine, President and CEO of America's Warrior Partnership, and R Shearman, the Staff Director for the Senate Committee on Veteran Affairs, to discuss and answer questions concerning the incoming administration and Congress and its implications on veterans' futures. Jim and David, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Jeanette, thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction. And Allison, thanks for putting all this together. David, you're far better dressed than I am, but I mean, you look great. And thank you for being with us at America's Warrior Partnership.
Well, if I had a cool zip up with the AWP logo on it, I'd probably be wearing that, Jim.
Well, if this costs less than $20, I would be happy to send it to you.
There you go. That's a problem. We'll solve that.
No, but right now I just looked. We've got 38 people on. This is one of our. We've got 80 people, by the way, registered. So we expect more to come in. But you're in a great position, and honestly, I'm going to be biased. You're working for a great guy. Senator Moran he really, his heart is in the right place. His beliefs are in the right place. And he's always, whether he was a minority or whether he was a ranking member or the majority or the chairman, he was always looking out for veterans and their families. So I know you well. Do you mind just introducing yourself a little bit? Tell folks about yourself, and then we'll just start having a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jim. And thanks to AWP for inviting me to speak with you all today. Really enjoy getting the opportunity to just have a conversation about veterans with people outside of my immediate team, but talking with you, who I know you're passionate about and work so much on veterans and how to better assist veterans, and to be able to speak before an audience that's interested in that topic, that's always very rewarding for me, and helps take me out of my day to day, so I get to remember why we're doing all the things we're doing. So it's a great reminder and refresher for me. So looking forward to that conversation. But so my name's R Shearman. I'm the staff director for Chairman Jeremy Moran on his Veterans Affairs Committee staff here in the U.S. Senate. I've worked for the committee in some capacity or another since 2015. So coming up on almost 10 years in March. 10 years. So I'm a veteran myself. I served in the Army. I was enlisted in the Army Infantry. Served as a mortarman. Originally, I signed up for 4 years, but then they gave me an extra year for free due to stop loss. And then I got out, was then called up out of the inactive Ready Reserve, the IRR, for a second deployment to Iraq as well. So the Army got their money's worth out of me. But what's important to me is that I actually got more out of the Army than out of me. And so, thinking about the work that we do here at the committee and thinking about how the chairman and the committee can best serve veterans, right? I think I draw a lot on my own personal experience and the experience of other veterans that I served with. And then very importantly, our staff draws and boss, Chairman Brand, draws so much on what he hears from veterans and service members back in Kansas. Right. So he will always say what he knows about veterans is what veterans in Kansas tell him, or what veterans in Kansas reach out to his staff. So that's kind of our our true north for our committee and the work that we do is what are veterans in Kansas and what are veterans across the country telling us. And so that kind of leads into a lot of the work that we do and the topics that we'll talk about.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. You talked about being a mortarman, and thanks for all that and going back a second time. There's not a lot of guys who came out of the IRR that I know, but that's that's the gift that keeps on giving, right? And but you have done, and we've worked together, and I've known you since you came up to the Senate VA staff, and you've done a lot of great stuff, and you've listened. I think that's the important thing that I've learned about yourself and the staff is that you listen. And we have a lot of folks on the call that provide us with feedback and AWP with feedback and help us come back to you. I just want to jump into something really quickly. You're a mortarman, and so TBI, overpressurization, the effect of mild to moderate TBI. Where do you see that going? I know that there's some work y'all are doing, but tell us, since it's a firsthand experience on your part.
Yep.
Let's start out there.
Sure. Being I was deployed to Iraq in 2004, 2005, and then again 2007 or 2008. And I think with IEDs, improvised explosive devices, there was a lot of talk and awareness about traumatic brain injury, mild traumatic brain injury, mostly focused on when these IEDs would detonate, right, and kind of quote unquote ring somebody's bell, right, and then go back to the fob or the base and get checked out, usually for like a concussion protocol, right? As a mortarman, what I was not tracking at that time, and what I didn't really hear about till recent years, really, was this idea and the notion that it's not only the detonation of a weapon nearby, like an explosive going off or like an artillery shell landing, that can potentially be damaging. What folks are looking at now is the actual firing of these heavier weapons. So it could be mortar system, artillery systems. It could even be large caliber weapons like a 50 caliber machine gun or 50 caliber sniper rifle. And then a lot of the anti-tank rocket and handheld weapon systems that infantry and other folks in ground combat forces typically use against armor, right? So that's a newer research effort looking at, wait a second, if you get hit by an ID once, you might be impacted. But if you fire thousands of mortar rounds over a period of 2 or 3 years, you might also have another injury to your brain that's causing some kind of either physical or mental health condition, right? So that's, I think, a newer area of research. And my boss, Chairman Rand, introduced at the end of last Congress a bill to look at low-level blast injuries and to direct VA under its Hand and Precision Brain Health Initiative to take a specific look at those topics, right? And provide some dollars and some direction to VA and say, wait a second, there might be something here. Go look at it and then come back and tell us, is there something to this kind of repetitive low-level blast exposure that we need to be tracking? And if so, what are conditions that we need to be on the lookout for? Or what are even, certain military occupational specialties or other jobs that we need to be looking at for a potential connection to some of those injuries or diseases, right? So for my boss, this didn't come about because one of his staffers used to be a mortarman. It actually came about from a oversight trip to Kansas, where we actually met a Kansas veteran who was a mortarman himself and knew a lot of people that were experiencing mental health conditions and had concerns about the role of repeated low-level blasts in causing those conditions, right? And so we know there's a kind of grassroots effort, a group of veterans that have been exposed to these types of weapons firing these weapon systems. And so we're really trying to understand their experience and figure out what is the next right step for VA to be looking at this issue.
That's fantastic. Thanks for doing that. And thanks for sharing that. I think that's a huge step forward. Related to that somewhat, but not really, is that kind of related is, one of the things that we see through our studies through our work with Operation Deep Dive and the suicide study is how had National Guard and Reserve. Do you count them as veterans? Do you not count them as veterans? With the census doesn't count traditional guardsmen or reservists as veterans, and the VA doesn't consider traditional Guard and Reserve as veterans, but you know that they're always they're always ready to go. They're always available. They're the force that supports the force, or they're the frontline folks. I guess my question is, where does it, do you see any legislation coming up specifically around National Guard and Reserve, and how to recognize the value of that force? One of the things that we would love to have as AWP is that if you raised your hand and swore to defend the Constitution, whether you worked at the state, whether you were a National Guardsman or a reservist, that you were willing to step up and pay that price. What do you all see? Is there anything in the future?
Well, I do know, and I forget exactly how long ago, but I'd say within maybe about 5 years ago, there was legislation that I think do part of what you're talking about, which is to recognize and honor the service. Some of those military members that raise the right hand and volunteer for the reserves or National Guard, who might not ever be on active duty orders and otherwise get that active duty veteran status. But to allow for those that do a full career in the reserves and retire, that they, for purposes of honoring them and recognizing them, can be known as veterans. So I know that's been done. And I think in terms of other benefits, or looking at the needs of Guard and Reserve specifically, I think there's been a big effort in recent years to look at when service members, when guardsmen and reservists mobilize or deploy, right? What are the duty orders that they're being mobilized under, right? And if they're serving in the same capacity as an active duty, regular active duty soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, postie, whoever, serving alongside them, that they would be eligible for the same kind of benefits and credits that those regular component one service members would get, right? That is more of a DoD issue and more of a Armed Services Committee issue. But where it does come into our committee's jurisdiction, mostly is on the GI Bill side. So we do have a bill, the Guard and Reserve GI Bill parity bill, that would better improve the parity for those mobilized guardsmen and reservists to earn credit towards their post 9/11 GI Bill eligibility when they mobilize and deploy alongside active duty.
Got it. Well, that's great. Yeah, I think it would also in healthcare, VA disability benefits, but I think we just need to recognize, this is my personal opinion, I think we need to recognize that anybody who steps up, especially in a day today when we are not hitting our recruitment numbers, anybody who steps up and is willing to serve in uniform needs to be recognized for for just that volunteer, that level of volunteerism. But let's talk about Senator Moran and the chairman, and what are his top 3 priorities? And if you want to do more than 3, I'm good with that. So
I might go a little bit beyond 3.
Yeah, that's fine. Just I'll open the door and let you go.
Sure. So one of them we already talked about, and that's the low-level blast injury. That's an area where when we think it's a new area of research, and really it's really right to dive in and improve everybody's understanding on it rapidly. Right? So we want to take advantage of that and also get ahead of potentially bigger, longer-term impacts on a lot of these veterans, right? So that's a priority to get some progress on that this year. The other thing, and if you've paid attention to Senator Moran and his work on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, you will not be surprised to know that focusing on community care and access to community care and really any kind of healthcare for veterans is a big priority. In the last, I would say, about 2 years, we've had a real uptick in cases where we're hearing from, in many cases, veterans, but in some cases, VA providers as well, who are just facing unnecessary bureaucratic challenges to accessing care. And a lot of times what happens is it's a veteran who's enrolled in the Veterans Health Administration, they're a patient, they're seeking care. That care is not either readily available under the direct care VA system, or that veteran and their provider determine it's in the veteran's best medical interest to get that care from a community provider who's already part of a VA network, right? But for whatever reason, and there are several different reasons that have been floated to us in response from the VA. But in some of these cases, the veteran is not being given the option to choose a community care provider when they should be, or if they ask for it, they're being told no, or they're being told VA is not funding that. So that's not really how the law is supposed to be implemented, and so that's a big area of focus for my boss is to get better visibility on that, and then actually implement some additional changes to the law to further clarify for VA what's required. This all goes back to the Mission Act, which was passed in 2018. It consolidated, I think, 7 or 8 different either fee-for-service or community programs that VA was already using, consolidated those into one program so that veterans had a very clear understanding of when they would be eligible to choose a community care provider, and VA could set up clear criteria on how. So that's a big area of focus, and we're looking to make improvements on that and just make sure that veterans don't get a runaround. If they need access, if they need care, they should be getting the quickest, easiest access to that care.
Yeah, no, I was up seeing you last week about that very subject.
That was a great hearing. It was a really good hearing. And so that's on the healthcare side. The other big thing that VA is known for in terms of benefits and services is disability benefits compensation. And that is a very different process from healthcare. But in many cases, going through that process first can often be a gateway for veterans getting a service-connected disability, and then through that, having eligibility to get healthcare.
Yeah.
What we've heard a lot in recent years is concerns from veterans about their access to that process, going through the process of filing a claim, appealing a claim, and ultimately getting the right decision. And in some cases, we now see for-profit companies that are starting to provide services to veterans to assist with this in exchange for a fee. There's concerns around how these companies are doing that. Some companies, there's been allegations of wrongdoing by them, and there's an effort to, I think, find the right balance on that. I think for Chairman Moran, while we're engaged in that conversation, it also begs the question of, wait a second, is the underlying process itself adjusted to the right point so that it makes sense for the veteran, so that the process to apply for and get veterans disability compensation actually keeps the veteran at the center of the process and focused on them as the person that we're serving, rather than kind of the bureaucratic process that's in place now. So that's another priority for us this Congress, is to dig into that disability benefits process, to look at what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And if there are changes in law that need to be made, changes in practice that need to be made, so that veterans have a better experience and can better navigate that experience without a lot of outside help, that's a priority as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. Those are great points, and I think, for us, working with veterans and navigating the claim system can be difficult. And honestly, when you look at the statistics, and if you go to an attorney, the percentage of your success rate of filing a VA disability claim is really high relative to going on your own or going through a VSO who may do it. It may be a little bit lower. And so why is there such a disparity? Is it that they're producing a better claim, or is it that the VA doesn't want to pick a fight with an attorney?
Yeah. I mean, those are all questions that we want to look at and try to figure out from everybody that's engaged in the space. Let's look at the current process and let's point out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, or where could we add something in that would just make a whole lot of sense for the veteran. No,
I hear you. So in light of the priorities, tell me anything about caregivers. I know there was a great big caregiver bill, and the Elizabeth Dole Act passed, which was fantastic. But what does the future look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know for my boss, he is very interested in caregivers and the issues that they're facing. I know the VA recently came out with its regulation Sorry if I'm not speaking up enough, everybody. I don't know if my microphone's off a little bit.
It's when you move away from the
Gotcha.
camera,
Okay.
yeah, then we lose you a little bit.
I'll try to stay close. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo, for pointing it out.
Yep. Hopefully y'all can hear me better now.
Yeah, we can.
Great. So VA came out with the regulation on its program of comprehensive assistance for family caregiver program recently. I know we are working with some of the key caregiver support groups on that and trying to work through any potential concerns as they roll that out. The expansion of the caregiver program was one of the key features of the Mission Act that passed, so we were excited to get that into law. Excited VA's gotten over the long delay in the regulation out. So we're actively keeping an eye on that and working with stakeholder groups on the implementation. In addition, though, to that expansion of the primary program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, there's some other issues that have come up recently that we're engaged in. Specifically, it relates to how are caregivers set up to transition once they're no longer the caregiver for them.
Yeah.
Right. And I forget what the percentage is, but I think there's a fairly large number of caregivers. I mean, eventually, most caregivers will no longer be a caregiver for a veteran at some point. And so are they set up to be successful afterwards? That could be looking at options for career counseling. I could also be looking at options for Social Security work credits and also other retirement programs, right? So I think there's a lot there, and hearing from those advocacy groups that are engaged on caregivers issues and that support veterans family caregivers, that's a big priority for us. And we had legislation last Congress that we plan to reintroduce along those lines, looking at the retraining, re-education, and retirement of caregivers.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic for doing that. Where do you see, we talk about suicide prevention, but I mean, we're starting to look more like deaths of despair, which is suicide, overdose, and alcohol related deaths. But where does that sit with the senator, with the committee, and in terms of priority?
For suicide prevention?
Yeah, because we've got the Fox grant is up this year for reauthorization. There's other things that are coming up, and I'm sure that the new administration is going to look deeply in that. I don't know where that falls in a priority for the incoming administration and the incoming secretary, but where does it fall for you all?
It's at the top. It's at the top of our priority list. With the passage of the Mayor John Scott Hannon Veterans Mental Health Care Improvement Act in 2020, authorizing the Fox Grant program was one of the key features of that for my boss. And so looking closely at the outcomes for grantees under that program, and then figuring out what changes need to be made under the reauthorization of that program, that's a top priority that our team is actively engaged on. I think veterans mental health and suicide prevention, even beyond just the Fox Grant program, that's a top priority for us as well. And so it's, I think, looking at kind of at all of the above options in terms of what are all the different tools that are out there from both what's been around for a while and is known and is proven, and then also asking, are there any new areas that show promise that we need to be tracking and supporting? And a lot of times it's asking tough questions of VA. One of the big things that my boss did last Congress was he led an investigation into the Veterans Crisis Line.
Yeah.
We heard from whistleblowers at VA and contacted the Government Accountability Office to actually get folks out there on the ground and run down some of these concerns that we had heard. We expect that that initial investigation will be concluding. We'll be able to share outcomes of that later this year as well.
That's good. Is there anything that can be done to improve the crisis line now, or do we have to wait for the outcome?
Yeah, that's part of what we're working with GAO on. So
okay,
not to get ahead of that, but yeah, more to come.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit. We don't talk a lot about it, but I think it's critical, and I have a lot of friends who fall into this. The Gold Star families and any POW MIA issues. Is there anything Gold Star families specifically for them for for the focus. I think sometimes, I think the worst thing you could do is forget about those families because they should always be remembered. But tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so that's another, I guess, constituency within the veteran and military connected community that my boss always holds in the highest regards. We've worked very closely with some of the organizations that specifically support surviving family members. And one of my boss's key pieces of legislation that he's reintroducing actually this week is the Love Lives On Act that he's leading alongside Senator from Georgia. The idea of the Love Lives On Act is that under current law, surviving spouse will lose benefits if they remarry a new spouse before the age of, I believe, 55, right? And so there's been a lot of concerns that have been brought up, I'd say in the last 10 years or so about that provision, especially with the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and ongoing actions in the Middle East. We're seeing uh, we're seeing younger families losing a service member on active duty, who are then left with this challenging decision of do I do I do I refrain from getting remarried, even though maybe I found love after that loss, and risk losing these benefits, um, or to try to keep those benefits going? Maybe they have a family. So that's an issue that my boss is trying to address through the Love Lives On Act, and removing that marriage penalty, a remarriage penalty for these surviving spouses.
Yeah, I know my good friend Bonnie Carroll has been pounding the table on that for years and
Yes.
years at TAPS. Bonnie's a Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, and she's been a big advocate for it, and her whole team has. And I've seen it. I've seen friends of mine who've been killed, and their wives, they go on, as you said, love lives on. They go on sort of to not remarry and not move forward because of it's a significant benefit. When you think about
Yeah.
the healthcare cost as of today, they can be significant. So tell me about what are your, I don't, the current administration hasn't come out with a lot of policies and a lot of positions on veterans. But clearly it's I think the confirmation for Congressman Collins is tomorrow, right? Tomorrow or Wednesday, I think it is. And
They're gonna vote on, the Senate will vote on his confirmation tomorrow, is what we expect.
okay. And so given that new secretary comes in, what do you all see? What's your reading tea leaves? I'm not, not predictions, but what's your sense of where things go, what the focus will be, how the I know that between the legislative office at the VA and your office, how's all that going to go? And
Right.
what can we expect?
Yeah, I would point to the confirmation hearing we held for Doug Collins as kind of the roadmap. And I think in that he kind of laid out several different priorities that he would take on if confirmed as secretary. One, I think it's accountability of the workforce, and just making sure that VA has the workforce across all the different administrations, offices, and the different subcomponents, that has the right people in place to do the job, and that anybody that's not doing the job or is holding people back is showing the door, so to speak. That's also another area that we're looking at in terms of legislation for workforce accountability, making sure VA has the tools to structure its workforce the way it needs, and if there are any bad employees, they can remove them quickly. I'd say that's one of the big areas.
Yeah, do you not think that the Accountability Act has enough, or does it not go far enough?
So I think that's part of a question that that Representative Collins will need to answer if and when he's confirmed. The Accountability Act from 2017 had clear intent from Congress on what it was trying to give VA the authority to do. There have been different decisions in federal courts and the Merit Systems Protection Board that have interpreted the law differently and have put restrictions on VA's ability to use that law. So I think we are actively awaiting feedback from VA on, okay, is that actually everything you need? And if not, here's legislation that can bolster your authority to do
Yeah.
that. So I'd say that's one area. And then I'd say
Yeah.
another area to watch for is the same as one of Chairman Rand's priorities, and that's access to care, right? So that's making sure that veterans can access care either through the direct care system or through the community care system as they need without delay. And so I think that's going to be a big area where we expect to work closely with the new administration on making sure that they're living up to congressional intent in the spirit of the Mission Act and delivering that access for veterans.
Got it. That's fantastic. Looking up here, so one of the things, and this goes back a long time, I testified to the Senate in 2011. And so during that testimony, it was about VA, DOD transition, et cetera. And one of the things that brought up in it was that after every major conflict since World War II, when the VA budget goes up, and then 5 to 10 years after the conflict ends, the VA budget, whatever growth they got, they take a 50% cut. And then Korea happens, it goes up, they take a 50% cut. And then Vietnam happens, the budget goes up, 10 years later, they take a 50% cut. The budget, the line, since 2000 has gone like this. It's like climbing Mount Everest. It's been a huge budget growth. I don't know that. I think it's 370 or three something. You know it exactly, but something $1 billion is the VA's budget. How do you know, there has to be some cuts. Where do you make cuts? I think financially within the country there has to be some cuts. Where do you make cuts? Because and what does that look like? Do you anticipate a reduction in the budget? Do you anticipate that during these next 4 years? I don't know. What are your thoughts on the budget for the VA?
Yeah. I have also seen that line going up for the VA's annual budget.
No, it's not like this. It's like this.
It's pretty steep.
Like this.
Yeah, it's pretty steep.
Yeah.
What I have not seen, but would be interested to see is an overlay of the VA budget growth compared to some of the other big departments or big programs in the federal government and their growth.
Okay.
Short answer to your question, I don't really anticipate that we're going to see significant budget cuts to VA in the next 4 years. I think longer term, bigger picture, I would caution anybody from just saying, that's a big number, let's cut it down. Right? I don't think that's the right approach. What I would suggest instead is that we actually talk to our veterans and talk to the many veteran service organizations and veterans advocacy organizations, and that we have more of a national conversation on why is it in our national interest to support veterans and see them successful, right? And I think there is a national interest in seeing veterans come out of the military and be successful after their service.
Somebody said that during a confirmation hearing.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, no, Senator Moran said it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. By the way, I love that idea. I love that concept that in order to have a strong Department of Defense and all volunteer force, you have to have a really effective VA.
Yeah.
I'm summarizing, but
yeah, exactly. And so but I guess then the question becomes, so what does it mean to have an effective VA, right? If we've determined and agree it's in our national interest to see veterans successful after service, and we ask the question, what does that success after service look like? 2, how can you measure it, right? In some objective manner of saying, okay, this veteran, yeah, they're more or less successful or not successful. And then if they're not successful, what are the types of benefits and services and programs that we can apply either through VA, Department of Labor's Veteran Employment Training Service, maybe through a state office or a state commission on Veterans Affairs, or maybe even through a local service partner like AWP or somebody else that delivers services out in the community. Then we can figure out, okay, when we apply those different services and benefits and resources, what has a positive outcome? Right? What moves that veteran from a needs help to a category of fully successful, right? And then what that does, or what it should do, is it should inform, okay, where are we spending taxpayer dollars when it comes to our nation's veterans, right? Does it make sense to still spend $365 billion a year through the
Hey,
Department
you
of
know the
Veterans
number.
Affairs, right? Or should some of that money better be used through additional grants at the local level? Or maybe some of that money is not actually moving the needle on any of the outcome measures that we're talking about when we talk about veteran success after service. So I think that's a conversation that is bigger than just the current fiscal year and the current budget cycle, that we need to start having that conversation now. So if we do get to that point where there is some kind of financial pressure, we're better equipped with those answers that we can talk about and say, well, no, this money is going to this outcome that helps the veteran in this way, versus somebody just coming up and saying, that's a really big number. Let's see if we can get it down. Instead, it's better for us to say, wait, no, those are the numbers because we've done the work on the back end to know what
Yeah,
we need to have in place to deliver the outcomes.
got it. Well, aligned with that, let me ask you, there was supposed to be an air commission.
Mhm.
Do you think it'll come back? Do you think it'll be revived, or do you think it's past its time?
I don't know that the Air Commission as it was delineated in the Air Act will be back in that same form. I think regardless of whether it is or it is not back in that same form, there is an issue regarding infrastructure across the Department of Veterans Affairs that the longer it goes unaddressed, the harder it will be to dig out of that infrastructure dip that we have, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
for everybody watching, that just means that VA facilities, VA's buildings are really old. I think many of them were built around the middle of the 20th century. We're spending billions of dollars a year trying to keep them up to standard so that we can deliver healthcare for veterans in them. And it's very costly. So to the extent that we could get ahead of that and figure out a better long-term solution for VA infrastructure, that also would potentially have an impact on the bottom line of VA's budget and how we allocate resources to deliver outcomes for veterans.
I get it. And thanks for that response. But let's talk about something else. Another veterans topic. GI Bill. Do you see anything happening with the GI Bill? Benefits, etc. I think you guys have passed over the years some great. I think the Forever GI Bill is fantastic. I know Jared Lyons is a great friend of mine, and he's worked hard for SVA to advocate for veterans and the student. But do you see anything with SVA? Do you see, or not SVA, but do you see anything with the GI Bill? Any tweaks that need to be made, or are we in a pretty good place?
I think largely we're in a pretty good place with the post 9/11 GI Bill or Forever GI Bill. I think there's always something new that comes up that maybe Congress didn't anticipate. I know there's also been a lot of work in the last few years regarding certain schools and if they're doing the right thing and meeting all the requirements for certification. And what do you do with a veteran and their entitlement to benefits if it turns out a school they were going to wasn't doing everything the right way? So I think we're always looking at ways to kind of maximize the return on investment for the GI Bill. I think we already know that's one of the best returns on investment of
Oh yeah,
any benefit anywhere across the federal government, not just in terms of veterans benefits. But yeah, I always want to make sure that that benefit is available as the kind of transformative opportunity for service members and veterans to really realize things that they would otherwise not be able to realize without that financial assistance and that security to attend school.
yeah, I agree. One of the things related to the GI Bill, and it is under the GI Bill, is the apprenticeship, and I've always been bothered by the fact that as an apprenticeship, the GI Bill, the housing benefit reduces if you're in an apprenticeship, whereas if you were in a 4-year program, it would continue pretty much level set. And that was always bothered me that maybe that was the disincentive. I think 7% of people who use the GI Bill use it for apprenticeships.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, or
Yeah, I think there's a larger conversation going on in our country about the role of higher education, so degree granting programs versus vocational programs like apprenticeship programs. I think there's a bigger discussion going on there, and I think the availability of educational assistance resources like the GI Bill for veterans means wherever that conversation goes, I think they're going to be playing a central role in that discussion. And I think as we, look at the American workforce, the labor market, and figure out what needs to happen, I think fine tuning or right sizing the GI Bill and specifically how it supports apprenticeship programs will be a key part of that.
Yeah, that's great. In line with that, I've got another question. It's the extension, for us working in the nonprofit world and working with corporations. SkillBridge is a huge space. I'd love for your thoughts about SkillBridge, where you see it. Currently, it sits within the Department of Defense. When their recruitment rates are down, they're not a big fan of SkillBridge because they want to retain as many people as they can. But how do you make it? What are your thoughts on where does SkillBridge go? I testified before the House a year ago when I could. And the question was, where do you think SkillBridge should sit? And my feeling was SkillBridge should sit within the VA. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what's the future of SkillBridge, since it is so effective in terms of a transition tool, a bridge tool.
Yeah. I think the most important, or excuse me, one of the key features of SkillBridge is not the training program or the placement with a company or other outside organization where the transitioning service member gets that job experience. The key feature is the paycheck that they're still getting from DoD, right?
The fact that they can paycheck and healthcare.
Yes,
paycheck
and healthcare.
Yeah.
The fact that they can keep getting paid and access healthcare while they go get job experience at no or very little cost to the private company or outside entity. We know some of those are federal government employers and state government employers too. But the fact that they can keep getting paid and get healthcare and it's at no expense to that outside entity, like that's a major win for the outside employer, and it's a major piece of security for the transitioning service member. To your point, where it really rubs into a friction point is with their commander, the active duty commander who's like, where are my people at? And I need people to make mission, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think the real tension is. Would SkillBridge be as successful if it was housed at VA? I guess the question would be who pays for who pays the salary, right at that point. Theoretically, the healthcare maybe they'd already be covered, but who pays the salary? And would that change that relationship? I'm not saying it couldn't work. I'm just saying it would be a very different way to think about it. And I think the other thing about SkillBridge is you can get into SkillBridge and start testing out some civilian occupations and realize, hey, maybe I don't want to leave the Army yet. Maybe I want to, re-up in the Navy for a while longer. In that case, it's a retention benefit for that commander, for that service. Although it probably doesn't happen in that way in most cases, that's still a possibility that you could potentially be foregoing if you moved it over to VA.
I've had a couple of guys who I mentored that went into SkillBridge and said, this is not for me. And they came right back and re-enlisted. The last question before we go to questions from on chat. Tell me about the STAR Act. Has it passed? Did it pass?
You're talking about the Richard Starr Act?
Yeah.
I don't think it has. So that's one where I'm aware of the bill and my boss is a co-sponsor of it. But that actually goes through the Armed Services Committee.
Okay.
Based on the actual benefit program that it may change is actually on the DoD side, not on the VA side. So I don't believe it has passed. No, I don't believe it has. So that was around at the end of last Congress. So
well, to combine with that, before you go to the questions, there's always been talk about, is there any talk about having a joint session between the Armed Services Committee and the VA committee to figure out, to get these things synced up?
We just did such a hearing focused on transition. I think that was in October of 2023. Okay. So we just did that. We don't do those all the time. It's probably not a bad idea for us to do that more often, but we just did that one a little over a year ago. So there could definitely be room for doing another joint hearing with the Armed Services Committee this Congress. So I think we would welcome that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so anybody on the net, right now we have 44 people, David, who are on. Here's a question.
Looks like
Knowing
Brittany.
that poor transitions out of DoD is causing increased dire need for mental health care and other VA resources, is there a joint effort between VA and DoD to solve the transition program out of all the armed services? I think we just talked a little bit. The reason I'm asking, it seems that the VA is facing the repercussions of poor transition program by the DoD, but the DoD doesn't have any impetus to fix it because you're already out the door. So you know, DoD, as you know, DoD is like, you hit your DD 214 and you go, unless you're retired, good luck. And then the VA has to, I always say the VA is the only department in the government that receives clients from another department. So how do you get everybody to work together?
Yeah, I think Brittany really zeroed in on the challenge in that relationship, right? DoD is responsible to get recruits in, train them, and then when they reach their expiration of term of service, they prepare them for transition, and then they discharge them. And then it's the VA's problem, right? So figuring out ways for DoD and VA and Department of Labor to some extent. Department of Education has been involved in the past, but looking at transition is really like this a major period of time, not a single point in time, and really an ongoing process, not kind of a once through and you're done. Changing the mindset about how we look at transition and think about it and get DoD and VA to better collaborate, that's been an ongoing challenge, right? And so I want to say it was in 2018. It was in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2019. There were some pretty significant changes to the transition assistance program that were mandated. A little over a year later, COVID happened. A lot of the implementation efforts to implement that new law were kind of sidetracked or derailed due to COVID. So I think even since then, we've still been trying to push DoD to get back on track. Implementing that law as Congress intended it. But it's an ongoing effort. And I think VA is trying to do a lot of things. It has a program called Solid Start that's looking at more frequent touch points for a service member after they transition out and getting them into the VA system. I think it's looking at who are the other actors in the space, and there's an effort right now to better integrate veteran service organizations during the transition process, so veterans are educated on them and know how to access those resources as well. It's not an easy thing though, but I agree that is a point where the better we can do on service member transition, the fewer, I guess, negative outcomes or issues that VA will have to deal with on the back end. So I think that will likely lead to fewer veterans getting to the point of crisis and making interventions, especially around mental health. Potentially can improve physical health. It can improve access to GI Bill or employment assistance programs. So all those lead to better overall outcomes. And what I always think of as veteran success. I think the final point on that before we move on is this goes back to something I was mentioning earlier about why is it in our national interest to have successful veterans. Part of it is this idea of if you're successful as a veteran, you're more likely to recommend somebody join the military, right? And so I think having more of those conversations between DoD, VA, and then back to the DoD leaders of like, hey, help us have more successful veteran outcomes by doing more work on your side. And then we'll have more veterans telling the next generation of Americans, the younger recruits, on why it's a good thing to join the military. And that can just be veteran being successful, and they're a good example. But it could also be an opportunity for DoD or the service branch to say like, hey, Jim, you've been out, for 20 years. Would you come back and talk to some recruits and their parents about what you got out of being in the military? It can be something like that. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity there, and it's an ongoing target that we're trying to hit.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, David. There's another question from Carlisle.
Carly?
Yeah, Carly, there it is. There are so many local entities the bottom line is there any way for DoD to let communities know that veterans are transitioning to them? And I know that you're the VA committee, but what are your thoughts about that? I know it's difficult. That's a big.
Yeah, and I'd have to I haven't looked into this issue recently, so I'd have to go back and check the status of it. But I do believe there was an effort that would have allowed basically would have had a service transmit to a state, like a state Department of Veteran Services, like
Yeah.
Kansas's Department of Veteran Services, a list of service members transitioning their area, unless the transitioning service member needed to opt out of having that information shared. So I know that was an effort. I'm not sure the status of that right now, but
Yeah,
yes, we've heard from
it does get
states.
transmitted, but what happens is, so what our experience at
Yeah.
the state level is, David, is that it's transmitted about an hour or about a year later. So it gets
Okay.
transmitted late, and then
Yeah.
the states then distribute it down into the counties. So the lag on that is,
Yeah, that's not useful.
yeah, it's not a, in today's technology, and I think the thing is that if a transitioning service member opts in and says, hey, you can share my data, DoD, just send it
Yep.
to a local beneficiary, etc.
Yeah, but I believe that was something that was discussed, and again, I haven't checked in on it recently, so I need to check on it. But yeah, to have them do that, you know, let them know, hey, we're going to do this once you opt out during the transition assistance program, get the information out there, and then hopefully have a service officer or somebody at the state or county level that's essentially waiting that can call them, the day they get out.
Yeah, no, I agree. Elisa has a question. It says many legacy caregivers I've spoken with are concerned about the expansion equaling removal of families that have been in the program for around a decade. Will programs be put, I think you mentioned this earlier in our conversation, David, will programs be put into place to support veterans caregivers before removal? Do you anticipate any new regulations will recognize the uniqueness of each veteran's injuries and allow legacy and future veterans to receive care they need and get caregiver program? And you had talked about the fact that that was one of the legislative pieces to put in is how do you take care of caregivers after they're caregivers, right? And what does that future look like? And I think that answers it, but if you interpreted it differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely our effort looking at the caregiver and what are their long-term needs for as they're a caregiver and then as they transition to no longer being a caregiver. And I think what Alyssa might be asking about too is how are the changes that are coming out in the new regulation going to impact families that have been in place? And so, I mean, that's one of the things that we're actively looking at, Alyssa, is how will it impact those people that have been long-term participants? Will there be an opportunity to grandfather in participants that have been in the program for a while? I don't know at this point for sure. Like I can't say, oh, we're going to do this or B is going to do this. All I can say is that those are all concerns that I think we're hearing from caregivers and from organizations like Quality of Life Foundation, Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and so we're actively trying to kind of work with them on okay, what is the new regulation do, or what does it not clarify, or what are the unanswered questions, or what are potential unintended consequences that are going to come out of this that we can work on now in coordination with those organizations to go to VA and either try to drive clarity, or in some cases maybe even say, hey, you might need to rethink that. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but unfortunately, all I can say at this point is like we're actively looking at that and working with those organizations.
Got it. She wrote back, thank you. I've got Lauren has a question, and I'm gonna ask, so as somebody who was in DoD who worked on the hyperbaric oxygen studies, the question is, what is the status of hyperbaric oxygen therapy being approved by the VA for TBI? As I said, I worked on it on the DoD side. I'm an advocate for more study, but I'd love for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those areas where I think there's that question out there of is there a clinical benefit to using that type of therapy? I believe VA has done some limited studies on hyperbaric oxygen therapy. If I recall correctly, the results were not conclusive that there was for sure like a huge benefit to it. So I know there's a push to study it further and find opportunities for veterans that want to get that kind of treatment to have VA look at those individual veterans and their outcomes, and then hopefully have a more robust data set that researchers can look at and go over and make a determination. Okay, is there anything clinically significant in terms of the outcome? So yeah, I think that's an ongoing question that I think more studies and more research will hopefully help to answer.
I have there's one more question, and it's part of Lauren's, which is mental health access. Any thoughts about mental health access? We talked about Gold Star families for Gold Star families.
I don't know that I have any specifically for Gold Star families. I'd have to go back and because I'm the staff director and I don't cover any one issue area too in depth anymore. I'd have to go back and get myself smart on the ways of what they're actually eligible for. But if there's a specific idea or a specific concern where you're having clients or veterans, surviving family members that are experiencing a need, those are the kinds of things that we at the committee want to hear about. I can't promise you that the answer is always going to be, okay, great, we can fix it right away. That's not always the answer, unfortunately. But the more we can understand what's going on the ground and what the challenges and needs of these family members are, the better the chances that we can do something about. So if you haven't, feel free to reach out to our committee staff. If you guys can go through Jim and his team, you know how to get a hold of us, or if you want to reach out to us directly, don't hesitate to do.
So, and just Susan Robinson kicked in and said, hey, Gold Star families can utilize vet centers. So that's just an information.
David, I thought that was the case, but I didn't want to say that and then get it wrong. So.
No, Susan.
Thank you, Susan, for helping me out on that one. Thanks.
I do want to be respectful of your time because you've got a ton on your plate. David, thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts and words. And we have, like I said, a lot of people on this call. We'll record it and we'll make it available. You've been a great partner for all of us, and thanks for your leadership up on the Hill, and thanks for taking the time. Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate you inviting me to speak and share. And to everybody that's on the call, if you have a concern or have an issue that you think needs more attention, working through AWP or working through another veteran serving organization or an advocacy organization, that's usually one of the most effective ways to get your message up to us in a way that we can understand it and then potentially look for solutions to address concerns. So you've all taken time out of your day to sit on this call and listen to me ramble on. So I would just encourage you that if you're willing to do that, that you'd be willing to keep doing the outreach, keep doing the advocacy, work with AWP or any other groups, because that's really how we learn what's going on the ground. And that's how we figure out solutions to help veterans, their families, caregivers, and their survivors ultimately achieve that success or as close to that success as we can after they're finished serving in the military and hopefully going on to continue serving in their communities. Yeah, thanks, David. And just to remind everybody, March 3rd, we have another battle rhythm. You can sign up. The title is the Integrated Approach to TBI and Mental Wellness. And I think David, I know a couple of people on your team who might want to sit in on that, but we've got some great speakers who run national level programs that do this. So I want to thank you, David, and I want to thank Allison for putting all this together. Jeanette, thanks for the introduction, and everyone who's on the call, thank you for joining us. It was really important for you to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
David,
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
You bet.